Hey, it's Rocky. Welcome to Richer Soul. Today's guest is Brian Eufinger, and we are going to talk about college admissions, preparations, and costs. Even if you don't have a kid going to college, there's a lot of value in learning how the games are played. Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? To have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and bring balance to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com. While you're there, you can sign up for a monthly email where I share the best articles I read this month, let you know about upcoming episodes, and share a little wisdom. You can also listen to coaching calls under the Coaching Calls tab. I also share the most interesting articles I read every week on Facebook at facebook.com/Richer Soul. And there's also a Facebook group where you can ask questions and interact with other listeners. Ruben Gonzalez was on my mastermind speaker this month. Here's a guy who's in his 50s competing again in the Olympics. How does that even happen? It happens because he was intentional in picking his sport, one that fit his lack of skills, and he had a great chance of getting in. He found a way in, and he kept doing it. 2 lessons. The first, start. It's the hardest part. The second, persevere. He won because everyone else dropped out. He also mentioned your mind can't tell what's real and what's imagined. All of the Olympic athletes imagine what's going to happen before it does. And they have the muscle memory they have built into their nervous system and their myelin sheathing to do it. You can check him out at thelugeman.com. I'm amazed that parents will let kids make a decision of $250,000 plus without hardly a discussion about life and money. The world has changed and college costs have skyrocketed like medical costs. I seriously question the value of college, but not of education. We're amidst of a massive shift and the game is changing. I don't know where it will end up, but I know the current system is not sustainable. The loan debts can be crushing for many kids and their families. Done poorly, you start life way behind and may never catch up, as many of these loans are not bankruptable, and that special loan forgiveness program has barely forgiven a loan. The government is making tons of money off the interest. I met our guest Brian through the Choose FI group and podcast, and we connected. I've had a few conversations with him around my kids and getting into college. I thought it would be helpful for everyone else to see what's going on. Brian and Sylvia Eufinger run a 2-person ACT tutoring company in Georgia called Edison Prep. They teach full-time and have tutored over 13,000 students over 40,000 hours. They still take both SATs and ACTs each year to stay current. Brian has the only back-to-back perfect scores in the history of the ACT test. Brian explains how students should approach the process to give themselves the best financial and career situations, both in the near term and long term. Let's meet our guest. Welcome to Richer Soul, Brian Eufinger. It's great to have you join us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
And I'm excited to have you join us on this conversation because I know the cost of college is a big thing for a lot of different families. But before we get to that, let's start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
I didn't really have any formal financial education. It was sort of not talked about, much like most kids, at least in my neighborhood, my generation. And I only really started learning about it when at the behest of my resident advisor in college, he told me that I have to take Professor Gordonier's Personal Finance 101 class because I'll never feel dumber than I felt in my entire life. And everyone takes it. And so I took that class in college. Best class I took by far. Glad he did that. But yeah, I had no formal financial knowledge at all growing up. I sort of accidentally had financial hustle, so to speak. I'm a big fan of Gary Vaynerchuk, and we have a lot of life parallels from a standpoint of, I would flip baseball cards, I would mow lawns, I would do things. So I had a natural sense of money's importance and what it could do and help pay for Six Flags and different things. But yeah, my eyes were not really open to the big financial picture until I took that pivotal class during undergrad.
So do you know where you got the drive with that entrepreneurial spirit? Was it something your parents kind of put into you, or is it just naturally there?
I don't know if it was conscious. I grew up, my parents are educators by trade. Pretty much every branch in my family tree is educators. And they bought a relatively reasonable house in the best public school district that they could because they knew the value of education. So from that standpoint, a lot of the kids I grew up with had more means. And so I got a nice front row view to that. And I guess what I saw was a lot of those wealthier families had dual career families, lots of work, lots of travel out of town. I knew that I wanted to be financially secure, but not have crazy hours. And so I knew that if you can find a way to financially educate yourself and optimize things, there had to be a better way, because a lot of kids hung out at my house because my parents were around and theirs were out of town. So I think that there's pros and cons, and I think there's no one right way to do it. But I probably passively absorbed that, never consciously thinking about it. And that's my philosophy in general. So I drive a very boring Hyundai Sonata. It's paid off. It's boring, and I drive 10,000 miles a year, so no need to do much different. The line that I always sort of have adopted recently is like that supermodel had that old line that said, "Nothing tastes as good as being thin feels," which is crass. But I think a personal finance version of that one that I use all the time is, "No purchase feels as good as early retirement." So that's a couple things that meet that bar. But most of the stuff that people fritter money away on, I think, is very effervescent and just fleeting, and they could really enjoy retiring earlier if they put their mind to it.
And those are some wise lessons. So what was it that professor taught in that class that was so inspiring or so informational?
Well, his name is Mike Gordonier. He's probably the only professor at Washington University in St. Louis who has his own Facebook fan club with hundreds of members. He just creates zealots and devotees. And you go to his class, there were people, if the class filled up, they would just sit in the aisles in spare seats and not take it for credit because the information was just that valuable. He's a financial planner, I think a fee-only planner by trade, but he just teaches because he likes to educate and preach his sort of financial philosophy and gospel. Great guy, hilarious, sort of like George Carlin meets Bill Burr meets CPA. And he knows everything because he's seen all the dumpster fires that have occurred for some of his clients. And so he has a lot of case studies, a lot of anecdotes, a lot of cool things showing you, if you do this, this, this at a young age, here's what happens. This, 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 here's what happens. And so he had a ton of amazing slides and case studies where if you had even an ounce of intelligence, if you tried to argue with him, you couldn't, because it was so blindingly compelling how he presented it. Everyone walked out of there like, wow, I got more out of the first 3 classes here than the entire semester's worth of other classes. It was pretty amazing.
It's funny because we all go to school for one simple purpose, it seems, which is to get a job and make money. And yet they don't teach money in most of school. And it's not that difficult. And as you said, 3 classes, you learned more than an entire semester. And that's a shame. The good thing is I'm hearing that is changing. And I think there is a lot more going on for people to start teaching money to college students. Hopefully they haven't already made a big mistake by spending too much on college. I guess it all depends on their particular situation.
Sure.
Why did you decide to go into the testing preparation business?
My first client really was when I was in college. So I've been doing it on and off since college. For spare spending money, I would do it as an undergrad. My wife and I had creepily similar life stories where both of us paid for all of Washington University in St. Louis top to bottom via these tests, flash GPA and the rest of your resume. But obviously test scores were important. So we're grateful. I have friends who have great resumes and who have done quote unquote everything right, who still have student loans, lots of them from undergrad and from grad school. And so I guess I'm just grateful is the key word, because I'd love to pretend that I had it all planned out and researched it back then. Obviously, I knew that test scores could be useful to get into better schools or save money or both, but I didn't realize the magnitude because I quit JV tennis junior year and I spent about half those hours studying for SAT, ACT, and the other half truthfully playing at Nintendo 64 in my friend Danny's basement. And I'll never make more money per hour than I did studying for those tests because I avoided such a six-figure sum of college costs. And I'm not that old. I mean, my alma mater is 228% as expensive now as it was then. So there were a lot of reasons then. There are even more reasons now. As far as why I got into it more recently, I worked in corporate healthcare strategy. I got a healthcare MBA back in 2006. And so I worked in that realm for a couple of different organizations. I wanted to try to save more money and pay off debt faster. And so we started doing a little tutoring on the side during the recession, candidly, because I figured that I was going to get laid off during the Great Recession. Luckily, I didn't, but it just sort of took on a life of its own. I'm a pretty good teacher, communicator, and I can adapt to a high-scoring kid, low-scoring kid, so I was getting great results. And quickly, both my wife and I ended up making more money doing test prep, even just part-time on the side. And we finally just couldn't do both well. And so it was actually MLK Day 5 years ago that we left corporate world entirely and have just been doing it full time since then and haven't looked back. So, but I do think, compared to just paper pusher job, which was a lot of what I was doing earlier, it's a transformative effect that we can have. So, it's a job, it's good financially for us, but also it's a big win-win because kids can get in better schools, families can save money. It can be, if kids do things right on the GPA plus test scores front, it can be a retirement date altering situation for the families. And so 13,000 students and growing, we've made a living for ourselves, but also transformed a lot of people's financial trajectories for the decades to come. So that's obvious. If you're going to do something 3,000 hours a year, obviously want to have it have some meaning and some impact, which is something it does every day for us.
And that's really cool. And I know you guys are kind of unique, or maybe it's not unique. It's just unique looking from the inside out, is you actually take the test every year, don't you?
We do, as part of the brand. But it's also important in that the test is not radically changing, but it is shifting. And the higher your score goals are, the more the shifts matter. If someone's just trying to go from a bottom 35% score to the national average score, truthfully, any book on Amazon that's written in the last 10 years is probably going to be fine because you can still miss 100 questions and get the national average score on the ACT, for example. But we have a lot of kids who are vying for scholarships and or admission to top schools. And there are all these things, box and whisker plots and slant asymptotes. They're getting really into matrices, ellipses, other things that you look at a test from 10 years ago, just frankly weren't focused on. And so if you're using a book or working with that was written more than 2 years ago or revised more than 2 years ago, or you're working with a tutor who hasn't really kept up to date, those first few points on the curve are just gone before the game even starts. So that's why we take it, because we need to stay current. It's great branding. But also we try to avoid what we call Helen Keller tutoring. Helen Keller tutoring is where a kid who is being tutored by someone who probably has a lower score than the kid does. Happens regretfully so much all the time throughout the nation, which makes no sense, but it happens a good bit. Especially because we have about 20% of our students that start with a 30 or higher on the ACT. The average kid we start working with has about a 25, which is a top 20% score. So you need to have people who are pretty high up there in order to shepherd them up the curve.
You need to be an expert yourself to do that. And I know you're talking ACTs, and I think in your area, that's probably more so. I know in the Northeast, the SAT tends to be more the test that people take. But each of them has their own slight flavors. And I know some kids do better at one than the other, and you have to figure out which is better for your student and then kind of focus on improving your skills within that test.
For sure. We tell kids that if I were a high school principal, I would have a very simple policy that all sophomores get to end their school year 2 days later than everyone else. And I'd have everyone last 2 days of sophomore year, day 1, full length SAT, see you tomorrow. Day 2, full length ACT, see you tomorrow. And that way kids can scatter to Boy Scout camp or summer this and that. But if every kid started off the pre-junior summer knowing where their scores are, which test they're better at, then there's no surprises. They can make their plan if they have a fall sport versus a spring sport, because there's a lot of kids that unfortunately are stressed and scramble and do suboptimal stuff senior year, when had they simply just known which one they were better at, just 2-3 hour tests, real full length tests, could have avoided that entire stressful process. So we don't tutor a lot of sophomores, but we try to get to parents and families as soon as possible saying, don't tutor sophomore year, but sometime before the end of sophomore year, like February through June, if you can take a full length mock of both, you can at least know that Pepsi versus Coke decision and start making your family's plans.
See, now I'm a little outside the normal. I had my kids start in 9th grade, maybe even sooner. But all I did was the college testing board used to have an app, and my kids complained because I think they made it worse, but it was a question a day. And so every day my kids would just do one question. So it wasn't like you were really studying, but they got so in tune over 2 to 3 years of doing a question pretty much every day, which takes all of a minute or two, that it became much more ingrained, and it really helped them to get higher scores without having to do a ton of extra work.
Right. Yeah. I mean, a little bit adds up over time. And certainly also it depends on what area of the country you're in. Are you from New Jersey originally?
I'm originally from New Jersey, yes.
Okay, yeah. But in the Northeast in general, I have a specific blog post on our website actually where I analyze New Jersey's impact on the ACT. It was picked up by the national media a while back. Basically, why the ACT has been having to adapt more things is, for the first 70 years, the South and the Midwest had a good run. Where we successfully hid the ACT from the Northeast. And about 5 or 6 years ago, the Northeast discovered the ACT. And as I like to joke, this is why we can't have nice things. Because down here, a kid will do 2 tests and think that that's a thing. In New Jersey, 2 tests is called part of one Sunday. And so it's not that that's necessarily healthy, but there's different regional attitudes towards the importance of practice. So I'd have to look up the recent numbers, but New Jersey's gone from a single digit number of perfect ACT scores to 100 plus. And there's obviously not 2,000% more kids in New Jersey. It's just people are now treating the 2 tests as truly Visa or MasterCard. Go see, either one's fine. Go see which one you're better at. And they're being a little bit more Switzerland as far as their test choice. Whereas before, the default used to be just based on what state you were in. You just sort of defaulted to your quote unquote, your state's test.
And that's what I think people have to realize. Today, you're competing in a global world. You're not competing in your little corner of the universe. And so you have to be prepared to be on that bigger stage.
Correct.
So one of the things I've noticed is you haven't scaled your business. You've kept it relatively small. Is there a reason for that?
Yeah, so we've kept it small because, one, I want to run a tutoring company, not a staffing agency. And that's often the feel that would happen if we try to become a big box company. We are, for better or for worse, in probably one of the hardest, if not the hardest, industries in the world to scale while maintaining quality. So there's all these cautionary tales we've seen where these companies that try to grow have seen their finances get cratered, but also more importantly, their quality get cratered. The reason being, if someone's pretty talented, they pretty much end up going out on their own in short order. And almost any full-time pro tutor you meet at some point has, quote unquote, done their time at a big box agency and then ended up doing their own thing. For example, the financial model of a big box company is what it is. It's just the nature of the business. The joke I make is if you want to turn $150 into $23, there are 2 ways to do that. One is to invest in Bitcoin. And 2 is to pay money to a big box tutoring company, because you can go on glassdoor.com and type in the name of any tutoring company that's a big, more than 5-person company anywhere in America. And the thing is, all the reviews, they report their salaries, the unhappy employees. Parents will pay in a lot of places like Philly, like Atlanta, like Dallas. They'll pay $150 an hour for a private tutor from a big box agency. And the tutor gets 23. And oftentimes they're 1099. They're paying both halves of self-employment tax. They're driving around in the lovely Atlanta traffic, all for $23 an hour pre-tax. So effectively, are those tutors probably making less per hour than they would just simply babysitting and getting paid cash? 100%. And that's why, for better or for worse, our industry is broken. And that's in every city. In every city of any size, there's 8 or 10 full-timers, and then there's the big box agencies, some of the national names and some of the regional names that are out there. And I just don't want the hassle, and I want to be able to look parents in the eye and just say, you are getting someone who does this full-time. My livelihood depends on it. At a big box agency, it helps a college kid upgrade from Bud Light to an IPA. That's really the main difference. They don't care if they go up, and nor should they, because if you're in college, you should be enjoying college and having fun. It's just a part-time gig. It's either your livelihood and you care about results, or it's not. Plus, the experience, someone who has seen all the different, any full-timer who's done it for any number of years has seen every type of kid: high confidence, low confidence, different timing issues, different score distributions, different attitudes. And you need to be able to handle all types of kids. And so that just takes experience. There's no shortcut to do so. So obviously there are other tutors out there who are good at Skyping or doing online Zoom tutoring. And we refer to those folks when we're asked by random people that, hey, could you come tutor me? I'm in Spokane, Washington. I've chosen not to do that because I just physically don't enjoy the online tutoring. I could be good at it. I just don't enjoy it. But we just tell people, no matter what city you're in, you owe it to yourself to find a full-timer. If you don't know who that is, you can look at either the best public schools or the best private schools in your area, have a college list in the college office of tutors that they recommend, and you can go ask them questions. That's your starting point. And the irony is, because the professionals don't have giant overhead and whatnot, they're often, we're cheaper than all the big box companies, despite having hundreds of times more experience than they do. No matter what city your listeners are in, go find the full-time pros. You'll pay less and get more.
I think that's true in a lot of different areas of life. I do real estate and I see the same thing. If I hire the professional directly versus going through, even if it's a small business type of repair place, I pay a fraction of the money and I get better work. And I think people it applies everywhere, those types of skills.
For sure.
This brings up the point that I think people don't realize how much is going on with people who are serious about the scholarship college entry game. They are getting their kids a ton of coaching and tutors. There are a tremendous amount. There's companies out there, I get them in the mail, that actually will coach your kid for 4 years to get into an Ivy League school. What are the different types of coaching and tutoring? And I've even heard of writing services where they're writing the kids' application essays as well. What have you seen out there as you've done your business?
That's a pretty broad question. There's a spectrum of services. So my wife and I, we just stick to SAT, ACT, but obviously being as enmeshed in the community as we are for as long as we have been, we have a database that we refer to. So if someone's like, my kid has never gotten a B and he has a C- in AP statistics, please help. I can give them a name. Or my kid is stumped about what to write for his college application essays. Do you know someone who's good at helping people brainstorm? We know folks who do that. Now, there's a spectrum of services. Obviously, if there's a service out there that, hey, tell us where you're applying, we'll write your whole essay for you, that's horrifically unethical, and those people should not be in business. I'm sure they operate in corners of the interwebs. But there's valid people who do college counseling who they are a lot of different roles. They wear a lot of different hats, and they do it full. The people who are, it's a lot like tutoring. The college counselors that anybody should talk to should do it full time and should be a member of one of two organizations or both. IECA or NACAC, NACAC and IECA, because they have a list so you can search in your city and your state, because they're people who've signed on to a code of ethics. They've done professional development. They stay current. They get these daily newsletters when there's big changes to the FAFSA, like the prior year designation that occurred a year or two ago that changed the whole game from a financial aid paperwork process standpoint. But it's like tutoring. You ask a lot of hard questions, get good references, and like tutoring, there's unfortunately very few really solid full-timers. In a city like Atlanta, much like tutors, there's about 10 really awesome full-timers, and then then it gets pretty slim after that. And also that's one service that is also doable online. There are people who like to meet in person, but there's also quality folks who can get service throughout the nation as far as the college counseling piece goes. I find that the college counselor is the biggest value. It's valuable always, but it's the biggest value, especially for the oldest kid, because you just don't know what you don't know. Depending on FAFSA versus CSS profile, which are the big two financial forms that are used by colleges, certain steps that might make you look better in a financial aid light at one place would make you look worse in another place. There's certain differences in early action versus early decision binding, certain early scholarship deadlines where even if it's not binding, if you don't apply by a certain date, you miss out. And so for a parent who is trying to not miss, big, important, game-changing deadlines or five-figure changing deadlines, their services are pretty useful. We don't do it ourselves, but there's value. And in the higher rank, to your point about the Ivy stuff, there's a lot of focus on the top 200 schools, obviously an outsized proportion. But it is true that to the extent you're looking for a large either winning large scholarships and or applying to top 50, top 100 schools, their value grows. So if you're applying to Southeastern Nowhere College of X, it's less worrisome to hire an expensive college counselor than if you're someone who is not just applying to top schools but also trying to get some meaningful aid.
And that's what I think people need to realize. The cost of college these days, on average, it's not hard to spend $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year. And when you multiply that by 4 years, you're looking at $250,000+ And that, for a lot of people, may be more than their house costs going back over time. So
for sure,
this is an expensive, I'm going to call it a game because I think it is a game. I know that a lot of colleges have increased their tuition prices only because human nature has told them, that says, parents say, well, we'd rather you have a higher sticker price and give us a discount than you offer us a lower price, because the parents looking at the college and going, you can't be that good, you don't charge enough. And so this whole mind game has been created, which is a shame.
Right. There are a lot of universities that we call them Macy's universities, because everyone seemingly gets a discount of, at least a little bit. I've never walked into Macy's and bought any garment that wasn't at least randomly 10% off because it was Tuesday or something. So you're right. The psychology behind the pricing is definitely there. Even if it leaves them with a giant remaining sticker price, they feel good about the $10,000 they saved, but they still are paying $60 or something. Which is
absurd. I don't know that any school provides that much value. But that's my personal opinion. As we're talking about these kinds of games, what are some of the games that are kind of being played there by colleges, parents, and students to get more money or to get the kids into a better school?
Colleges get smeared a lot, and I think that they're trying to just survive some of the changes that have been thrust upon them, for better or for worse. When I was in high school, I'm not that old. I graduated this millennium. But, email was around, but you didn't have pretty PDFs that you could fill out and auto submit applications. The Common App was not as evolved, barely around. Colleges have a really hard time predicting who is going to come to my university. The med school matching process has its flaws, but it also has some nice things where there's a cap on how many places you can apply. There's rankings, there's other things. You see these stories online where people are applying to 157 universities, and that's an extreme, but like there's a lot of people at a lot of schools that are applying to 15 plus schools. They can only attend one. And so it's a lot of playing footsie where a college is trying to assess, well, we never heard from you until you applied early decision, but you never liked our Facebook page. You never emailed us. You never did a campus visit. You were a ghost. Do you really want to come here? What's going on? And so colleges have the very hard time of, in this era of the Common App, where kids all too often just get their mom's credit card and go click, 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 and apply to 15 schools. It's made the process harder for colleges. So I don't think there's anything nefarious. I think that honestly, if there was just a maximum number where you had to like submit an appeal to apply to more than X schools, not saying no, but at least to put a little speed bump to stop some of the insanity of people applying to 36 schools, that would tamp down a bit of the process and make things a little more predictable, because it's really hard to know. But so some of the games that go on, I think, are misdescribed as games because colleges are just trying to bring sanity to that process. I think the reason why colleges use early decision is, yes, it helps balance their books. I used to work in healthcare strategy. So to use a healthcare analogy, if XYZ hospital in your community does not have at least, say, 55% Blue Cross and Aetna, they probably can't break even. And so if a college doesn't have at least X% full payers, they probably can't break even without dipping to the endowment or doing other creative things. So early decision binding has grown in a big way. And obviously it's easier to get into college early decision, because, but it's not necessarily that they're doing something untoward. They're trying to, one, lock in half their class, because that way they know they have you, versus the kid who's applying regular decision but applying to 27 schools. And also they can admit people and know some sense of what finances are coming in for half the class, so that they can make intelligent decisions when they're massaging the rest of the class during the regular decision round. Obviously, for families who have the means to do early decision, that's a big game changer. I know UPenn just released their stats this year. And just for listeners who aren't clear on the terminology, early action is where you apply earlier and you find out earlier, but it's not binding. Whereas early decision is you apply early, and if they accept you, you have to go. So the slide that I just inserted into our parent meeting deck for the info sessions we do in Atlanta, here's the numbers. The class of 2023 at UPenn, ED applicants got in 18% rate, and early decision got in 18% of them got in. 5.46% got in for regular. So that's it's a 300% difference, over a 300% difference. And so there's for families who can afford that risk financially, it's a big deal. For families who can't, then obviously they can't. But that's the kind of thing where a family who is their oldest kid, they don't know anything about the process. That's the kind of value where like a college counselor or going to the college nights or just spending a lot of time researching stuff on the internet can pay off, versus winging it and learning better for the second kid.
We will be back with Brian in a moment. Let's talk about how profit comes first, both in business and life. My financial success is because I pay myself first. Let's face it, everyone else isn't going to wait on you or prioritize you. So you best prioritize yourself. If you struggle with figuring out how to take your profit first in business, or even if there's a profit at all after your expenses are paid, it helps to do something about it. I can work with you, your bookkeeper, and accountant to help you better master the numbers in your business. It's actually a painless process, and you learn to be a money master. It's a lot easier than you can imagine when you have someone like me to help. Let's face it, if you're going to get all this help for your kids to get into college, why not get help for yourself as well? Now, let's get back to our amazing conversation with Brian and how his advice can save you tons of money. So you said a couple interesting things. When you look at the university, though, in general, for the better universities, what % of their class do they fill with early decision versus later on?
40 to 60 is pretty common. I mean, there's one or two outliers out there that are like 80% or so, I've been told. But most of the schools in the U.S. News top 50 will fill, probably 35 on the low end, 65 on the high end, but mostly 40 to 55% of the class.
Wow. And so if you agree to early decision, you have no idea where your scholarship money is going to come in. And is that true, right, for merit as well as for?
There are websites that there's all the net price calculators and all the different tools that have come around just in the last few years that are pretty good. And they're more accurate than not. But yeah, there's a little bit of a question mark where you can fill out the net price paperwork or the tools, and you can ask hard questions via telephone of the actual admissions office, and they're pretty helpful in my experience in walking you through that. But yeah, once you get in, there are a network, because there's always people who say, well, how would they know? Or couldn't you just back out? Or couldn't you say, I'm not going to college? In a day of big data and all that stuff, there's always people who ask the obvious question, but couldn't I back out? How could they stop me? And there's different philosophies and different areas of thought around that. Obviously, there's, your word is your bond type stuff, but it's also possible that certain schools share data with each other such that you could get other offers rescinded if you later get in other places, but you got into a place early decision and then withdrew. So it's far from universal, but you'll see anecdotes if you Google enough about a kid who tried to play fast and loose and no, I'm going to take a gap year and go to Barcelona, and then actually was just trying to go to a different school that they got in regular. And so there's stuff that happens. Just as a public service on that, really, for your listeners, just to make the process less stressful for everybody, if all parents could really have a little post-it to themselves, like as soon as kid has made their final college decision, make the deposit and go physically. Yes, it's going to take an hour of your time. Go tell all the colleges that you got into, hey, thanks, but no thanks, because that's when there's all this waitlist craziness and then all this yield craziness where colleges aren't sure who's going to say yes and not. The earlier in the process they know things, the better. And so it just adds a lot of sanity. And just because people are busy and distracted, it's the polite thing to do. It's done very, very little.
And I guess I never really thought about that part of it. I do know that the admissions people are very good about being upfront if you know the right questions to ask. So we were just at a college fair at an event that we were at, and they had colleges from all over the country, a few of them that my son is interested in. And literally I had 3 standard questions. You're telling me that you have scholarships because he's part of this program. Are they stackable? And, 1 out of 3 said, no, it's not stackable, which means they would give him a scholarship because he was in the program. But because he was going to get merit scholarships as well, the two don't combine. So essentially, the scholarship from the program he's in is worthless. And then the second question, I was like, how many credits will you allow us to transfer in? And that also made a differential between some of the schools, because my son will have, I think, close to 60 credits by the time he's ready to start his freshman year of college. So they're very good. If you ask the right questions and clarify, they're good about that. And then the other question was merit aid. Do you have merit aid? What's the extent of it? How high does it go? Do you have full scholarships? And they were all very good about answering those questions when I asked them. And it literally took me, I think I talked to 3 different colleges that were high on his list. Within 5 minutes, I had all the info that I needed to. And I think we'll probably rule one out, but that leaves 2 others that we can go into much more depth with because of that.
Yeah, the stacking is one that bothers me because so few people know until it's too late. And these kids get punished for being industrious so at certain schools, where if you got merit aid from the school and then you win an Eagle Scout scholarship and a this and that scholarship and a Rotary Club scholarship, then they would just decrease it dollar for dollar, giving you 0 incentive to apply. So it's unfortunate because, kids, it's so hard in this very social media distracted age for teens. The rare kid who does write a bunch of essays and work hard and win some scholarships, to have some of that money clawed back is by some schools and give them no reason to do it is unfortunate. So WashU let me do all that. That was part of the reason why I had such different financial aid packages at school. Because I won the Robert Byrd Scholarship, the Southwestern Bell Scholarship, and Eagle Scout Scholarship, Bright Flight, which is a thing for Missouri residents. There were a bunch of different ones that, even that if you look at the actual price tag at place A versus place B, almost a huge chunk of the difference in overall cost was, were they stackable or not? And I think that's one issue parents are unaware of the nuance of. So you're right on that.
And we found that out with my daughter. We were shocked to learn at the one school that it was not stackable. I'm like, why did she go through all of this if you're not going to do that? It happens, I guess, and that's a shame. What are some of the behind the scenes reasons for the way things are and the kind of the game that we all have to play here?
That's a broad question. Which specific parts?
I think how college has become so expensive, and then all of these kind of games that we have to play with test scores, and I can't believe the amount of kids who are literally resume building for college, just kind of claiming that they belong to all these different groups and barely showing up anywhere. It's nuts.
Right. Numbers still matter. The biggest two or three quantitative variables, or just variables, period, when you're applying to school: GPA, did you take hard classes, and SAT, ACT scores, in that order. And a lot of the fluffier, fuzzier stuff, like the activities, like the essays, like all that, is given weight, but less weight, because, to your point, I've always wondered that there's no way that they have enough staff to even do cursory spot checks for some of the applications. So you're almost, where's your bond, hoping people, were you really part of that club for 3 years? Like, there's not an easy way to verify, whereas your transcript is real numbers, your SAT scores are your real numbers. So I think that part of the way the admissions process is the way it is because there's a lot of fluffy parts that are hard to verify. And as far as the essays go, I had a client where it was kind of awkward, but funny in retrospect. Mom, dad, kid had 2 hours remaining of tutoring they purchased, but the kid knocked the ACT out of the park. And I'm like, I can refund. They're like, actually, can we just sit with you and you can look at our college list, flash a couple things and see if we're crazy. And so I said, sure. And so mom, dad, kid came in with his resume and where his college list was and different financial parameters, and then a draft of his Common App essay, which is the one that goes to all the schools since it's for the Common App. And I'm a pretty candid guy, and it came out a little more coy than I meant. But she's like, "So what do you think about the Common App essay?" But she said it in a way that was a little too proud. And if you'd read the essay, I said, "This essay smells like a 45-year-old woman." And the dad started belly laughing. Mom got beet red. Kid was on the floor almost in a fetal position. And we just tell kids all the time, if college admissions officers, I read very few admissions essays, and I could spot it from a mile away. So the worst thing that can happen is if there's an overzealous parent who weighs in. Help if your kid has brainstorming ideas they want to run by you, great. But admissions officers are not dumb, and if the first step you have, and hi, here's me, I'm Jeremy. Here's an essay that clearly I did not write, my mom did. Starting off from a place of dishonesty is not a good look. And so I don't think there's malice, but I think a lot of people don't realize how smart the admissions officers are. They read tens of thousands of essays a year. So they aren't expecting you to be perfect. You're an 18-year-old, but they wanted to have a voice of a kid. And I think that's in a lot of the more competitive schools where there's a lot of frenzy. I think that's actually an under-discussed Achilles heel that really hurts a lot of kids' applications. And, if they're your parents, why? Because I said so. Like, it's hard as a kid to fight back a little bit, but yeah, parents should only after the essay has been fully written, first draft, should a parent take a look at it. Honestly, the best people to take a look at it are people who care about you, but only a little. Like, if your dad has a trusted coworker who's a pretty good writer and pretty smart guy, he's 1 degree of separation. Your parents love you because of your parents. But I think that essay, especially when all these schools have such similar stats, that the essay it's very hard for the essay to take you from 0 to hero, but it can certainly knock you out of the running pretty quickly if it's a pretty terrible essay.
I learned of a recent resource, which is Johns Hopkins actually publishes their best essays from student applications. Mm-hmm. And you can go and look at their essays, and it's not so much that you're going to copy their essays, but you see the flavor of what sells and what it is that they're looking for. They have a style that they want it done in. And I've noticed that because even in some of the marketing material we got for the coaching services, you looked at the essays and they showed a before and an after, and they show it's about telling a story. And if you're not aware of that part of the game, then, as you said, you get knocked out early.
For sure. I guess from a anecdote perspective, it'd be helpful for listeners. We've had 13,000 students. It's, a lot of this stuff blurs together after a while, but there's one essay I'll never forget. And this kid, his dad was mad at his essay, and his dad wanted me to weigh in. And by that, I mean, he wanted me to say he was right and his son was wrong. And he got mad when I said it was candidly the best essay I've read in years, if not ever. If you saw this kid, he is ripped. He is a muscular, thin, athletic dude, athletic All-American looking guy. And I read his essay and I was like, is this a real essay? Like, is this truthful? And he got mad. He's like, yes, of course it's truthful. His dad had a high pressure, long hours job. And at a very young age, when he was like in 6th or 7th grade, had a giant heart attack in the middle of the workday in his office. And he lived, he was fine. But that was a wake-up call. Like, the family at the time, unbeknownst to me, they were all decently overweight, could have done things better, whatever. Whole household went vegetarian. They started running the Peachtree Road Race together here in Atlanta, which is a July 4th marathon that goes on every year. And they just changed their whole world. And the family lost hundreds of pounds combined as a unit. And you'd never know it from this kid. And I forget what school it was that had this application essay that year, but it said, what is one accomplishment you're proud of that would not go on a traditional resume? And he described his weight loss. And it was very heartfelt. I mean, it was the perfect application essay. And the dad was worried because it was some engineering school. And the dad was worried that he wasn't going to talk about robotics this, or, I joined this club, that. And I said, that's already printed as a bullet point in the resume. Like, this is a freaking fantastic story. That's, I'm a hard person to please on the essay front, because there's so much trite stuff that goes on in essays. I'm like, this is perfect. Don't change a thing. Submit this to a journal. Like, this is the perfect essay. And the kid liked that. After the kid got in, so the dad was okay with it eventually, but he figured that was too soft or too not academic enough. But it really is about telling a story, and not a trite one like Habitat for Humanity or I tore my ACL and fought my way back to a starting position on the squad. They read too many of those.
And it's very true, because my son's on a robotics team and they literally don't care. They're like, yeah, we expect that. Next. You've got to kind of tell the story beyond just the fact that you've participated in a particular event, or, as you talk about, kids get injured in sports all the time and they fight their way back. What we think is unique probably for these colleges is, yeah, you're one of 50 this year with that same story. What's unique and different about you, actually? And you mentioned something earlier that I didn't dig into, but you talked about liking the Facebook page and the email. And I don't know how much people realize that making friends with the admission counselor, because if you're in a competitive situation, that admission counselor has to go fight for your kid to be the one that gets admitted.
For sure. Yeah. If you're a ghost, it's very hard. If they've never heard from you at all versus you've contacted them. And not everybody logistically or financially can afford to visit everywhere, but there's a lot of free ways, free methods to contact schools and to show interest. And a lot of times kids are not doing it to try to game the system. I have a student who wanted to double major in 2 very specific things, and they sent a few emails clarifying, if I do this, does that mean I'm going to have to be at least like a 5 or 5.5 year type of situation? Because if so, they probably couldn't afford that extra time, because different schools had different policies on that. And so that, even though that seems very simple, like you're asking what seems like a clarification question, that is 80% more than 80% of people don't ever have any big time contact like that with a school.
Both the schools that my daughter applied to knew her very well. Mm-hmm. She was on their radar and she had been doing a lot with them. The sad part was she didn't get a full scholarship, but that is probably because looking back, we know how we could have possibly tweaked some of the stories.
Right.
And unfortunately, that's what it comes down to, is doing that. The other thing that I haven't heard as many people talk about, and maybe you know how valid it is, it's the common data set that every college puts out their statistics in this common data set. For me, it was kind of eye-opening to see what colleges want, what they're looking for, and how they rank students. What have you found with regards to that?
So the common data set, for listeners who haven't heard of it, it's great. You can Google it, find data for every school, and they'll say, how much they'll ask all these schools in a very standardized format. I compare it to when you go to the grocery store, there's a standard format for the nutrition label, calories and sodium content, all that. So it's standard, and that makes it helpful for parents who are comparing side by side. But it'll have a lot of things like average SAT, ACT, GPA. How much do you value whether a kid did this? How much do you value expressed interest? How much do you value all these different variables? And so you can see what makes them tick, and they report, and I found them pretty honest on that front. Now, there's one piece of the common data set that, unless they've updated in the last year or two, it's not there to my knowledge. Parents need to look at data on websites, common data set, as well as actual schools' websites, and be very specific about the academic stats. Is this the data for admitted students or for those who matriculate? Because obviously the numbers for those who matriculate at any school other than, say, Harvard and a couple others is going to be much lower. Is the valedictorian of the fanciest school in your town going to apply to local state U as their safety and count into their admitted statistics? Yes. But are they going there? Of course not. And so job number one is getting in. And so too often, if parents look at the stats from some press release in the newspaper that says, here are the stats of the people that are gracing campus this fall, that's good data, but it's better data to look at only the admitted, not the matriculated, because the matriculated is going to give you a false sense of hope because those numbers are way lower. So just generally, most times I see the matriculated numbers on the ACT, for example, being 2-3 points lower at least than the admitted. Just because, look at me. I mean, did I apply to University of Missouri? Sure. Was I ever going to go there? No. And so that kind of thing can tweak the numbers in a pretty meaningful way, especially, and we haven't talked about this yet, grade inflation is a thing. It's such a thing. And a lot of well-meaning parents where they both have careers and they're busy and they think they're checking all the boxes. Most parents who graduated, I'm 37. I have some friends who have high schoolers right now that got started earlier, or they're about to. They have middle schoolers, and I've been educating them. Like C's were a thing in the late 90s. Like I have tons of friends who got plentiful numbers of C's who did fine. They were in college. Things are fine. The grading spectrum has been compressed because, as most parents know, you can turn in extra credit. You can turn in test corrections where you can claw back half of the credit from an assignment. There's a school district in Des Moines, Iowa, that as of next year is forbidden to give any grade lower than a 50, even if you don't turn the assignment in. So parents don't realize, like a 3.5, super classy. In the 90s, a 3.5 is below average at many high schools in Atlanta. The one I always pick on, Walton High School is about 10 miles from my house. If you have a 4.125, you're not, or a 4.215, you're not even in the top 10%. If you have a 3.7, you're not even in the top 45%. And so parents, all the SAT, ACT stuff we do, I turn down clients a dozen or more a year ethically, because if the kid comes to me and has a 2.8 and a cold 30, it doesn't matter. A 30 versus a 36. If you have a 2.8, there's 3,000 plus schools off in the nation that are off the table. There's still 1,000 plus remaining, but nothing I do matters. And so I think many parents who want me to tutor their 8th grader, I say, make sure that they have a good foundation in math and, do some math enrichment camps and make sure they take good classes in 9th grade. So I think that's the part that is lost in this process. There's a time and a place for the ACT and SAT, generally once sophomore year is over and junior year is not, it's a great time to be taking the test. Dipping your toe in the water with some of the question of the day apps like your kids did is good. But the hardcore prep, you don't want to take your eyes off the prize of freshman and sophomore year. You should have one goal, and that is to get as great of a GPA as possible so that you don't close any doors before the junior year test prep stuff even begins.
And most of these schools, especially the large schools, they have profiles on your child's high school. They even know how to kind of rate your high school, and they will look at the kids and their grades and compare it to that school, and they curve it themselves.
Sure. And a lot of the comeback that we have to fight against kids who will look at me with this face and say, well, my school doesn't rank. Well, no, Caleb, they do. Because what if your private school, yes, quote unquote, does not rank, but there's 80 kids in your grade and 10 of them apply to Vanderbilt? They might not know where you rank out of the 80, but will they absolutely know you are the 8th best GPA out of the 10 kids that applied from your school to Vanderbilt? 100%. So there's no hiding from class rank. You can play all the games you want. That's just playing games with words. But yeah, the class rank is a thing, whether your school formally ranks or not.
Again, all of this comes down to money, because this is thousands upon thousands of dollars in scholarship money. It was kind of very eye-opening to me that the biggest money that comes in merit aid is they don't even care about your kid and what they've done. It's literally GPA SAT score. And that is what drives a lot of the college money up front, and a tremendous amount of it.
Right. I'm sure there's going to be show notes for this episode. The case study that I like to show parents, more colleges, whether it's to be ethical or to just reduce the number of phone calls that they're getting. University of Alabama, Huntsville, great engineering program, right near all the space stuff with the government. But they have a grid that says it's a latitude, longitude grid. Here's your GPA along the x-axis. Here's your test scores along the y-axis. If you get this, here's the money in writing. Thanks. And they've really elevated themselves the last 15 years compared to when I was in high school by essentially purchasing a decent chunk of their class, which is a very ethical way in my mind to boost your rankings. But whether it be, I think Michigan State has it now too. But there's probably 100 plus schools that have a grid where parents can have certainty that if I get this and this, then I get this discount, no questions asked. I have a kid right now, believe it or not, who's a senior, has his college roommate picked out already. He's already a student at this school, and basically, he already has on the ACT, he has a super scored where you combine the best section scores from different dates. He has a super scored 32 on the ACT, but not on a single day. And at this specific school, they have a published award where you get $8,000 a year, renewable all 4 years, so $32,000 if he can get the 32 on a single day. So as long as it's by the time you step foot on campus, every college has different policies, so you got to watch the fine print. But at this school, if you have not formally started school, so even the June test for him, if he can submit paperwork from the June test with a single day 32, he saves dad $32,000. And so dad is going to make him go to work with dad and grab a cubicle and pound out a ton of ACTs. And he's like, I will pay for fraternities if you do it, and I will not if you don't. So I get 4, you get 4, I get 28. Sounds like a good deal to me. And so the kid came by my office and said, hey, can I pick up 20 tests? This is the last kid you'd ever expect to say, can I pick up 20 tests? 1, because you're a senior, 2, because he's not that hardworking. So there's all these rules and scholarship grids that parents don't know about. And a lot of times, if you downgrade one level of school, you pick up the merit aid.
Which means a slightly lower school, a lot more money. And it probably doesn't make that much difference in most degrees when you come out.
It depends on the major. There's a lot of places where the decision matrix is different. Like, for example, nursing, the most important thing for nursing is, are you a direct admit program where you're guaranteed to get in? Because if not, that's a big risk. But once you pass nursing boards, your NCLEX exams and all that, there's less differentiation of someone who goes to an expensive school versus less expensive school. On the other hand, there's certain schools that are feeders for certain internships and companies. It's highly dependent by major, but it depends on what to major in.
And that's why you have to have the conversations. I think that's one of the biggest takeaways is parents and kids need to talk, and parents need to listen, because a lot of the stories you've told me are parents not listening. And I think that's a big part of it. You've got to actually listen to your kids, hear what they want, or The amount of kids who switch their majors once they go is through the roof, either because they didn't realize how hard it was, or they decide they don't really like it anymore. So having these kinds of conversations and being open and listening and going back and forth and understanding the money game and being clear to your kids on the money game, I think is a very big part of this entire process.
For sure.
So what do you see are the people who are most successful at, I guess we'll call it, playing this game of getting into the college that they want? What is it that they're doing differently?
Obviously, it's a broad question.
It's not just the college they want, but the money to go with it as well.
Right. I think it's like anything else. It's about making yourself stand out. If you look at, obviously, the GPA and the test scores are part of the game because that's just the initial sorting factors. Like, for example, I have to look at the exact stats, but I know since I moved to Atlanta about 12 years ago, Georgia Tech has over 400% as many applicants as when I got here. I'm guessing that the Human Resources Department has not let them hire 400% more employees to read the applications since then. So it's not an enviable job. They're good people. They're ethical people. The admissions officers are I know a lot of them. They're good folks, but they're drowning in data. And there's been some big data and different tools that have helped them do their job more efficiently. Otherwise, they would have drowned long ago. But I think students sometimes think that once they've checked the box, that's it. They've checked the box, and that's what gets your essay read. And then if there's no substance there, if it's all foam, no beer, then it's hard. I have a kid who had a 36 who got rejected, 36 top 5% class rank. His mom was so scared of his GPA and test scores not being stellar that she more or less made him come home every day and study for 10 hours. His resume, extracurricular wise, was basically nothing other than NHS, which he got in just by virtue of his GPA. And he's a kid with a 36 and top 5% class rank that got rejected from 5 of the 7 schools he applied to because he overreached. I'll leave the places he applied off there, but they were all, the usual suspect, a lot of top 25 type engineering schools, mostly. And I told his mom, I have an email. I'm like, if you don't let him do activities, we're going to have a really awkward conversation in April. Please. He's so smart. He could do his homework left-handed while half asleep. Let him do some fun activities and round out his application. But I lost that battle. So, I think the successful kids are ones who look at what their profile is going to look like overall, not just grades and test scores, but activities and also the financial realities. I think parents having you can leave some of the detail out, but giving kids a sense of the general financial parameters so there's no surprises where a kid works one way during high school only to find out that the rules are way different than they anticipated, which is, a heartbreak for some kids. I think that's important. And I also think kids don't realize how much small things matter. There's a lot of kids who I played tennis, did NHS, and did X, and then I got a good GPA, and that was that. That's a very common profile. I have a girl, most talent, probably the lowest academic numerically achiever, who got into Notre Dame some number of years ago. Picture social media 5-7 years ago, back when Facebook was a baby, Instagram was a baby, all that. This girl was over it. She's like that old TV character Daria, where she was not all about, picking homecoming float colors and whatnot. She was an old soul, but she loved dogs. And so she was really good at technology. And so she walked around to a bunch of different organizations, animal organizations here in Atlanta. Your average animal organization in Atlanta has a not necessarily so tech savvy founder who's focused on dogs, not staying up to date on technology. She helped them create Facebook pages, Instagram pages, etc., for their dog adoption, or cat adoption, just animal groups. And she just helped them do that because then what happens? They can adopt more animals more quickly, and more animals are saved and don't go to the kill shelters and whatever. And she wrote her essay about how, and she was kind of a little bit mean, but she's like, no one will ever remember 2 days from now, much less, or even 2 seconds from now, if I helped pick the right color for the homecoming float. But how many dogs will I have saved? That was the first 2 lines of her college application essay. No one with her stats should ever have gotten into Notre Dame. Never. But is there at least one dog lover on every admissions committee? For sure. And truthfully, that's my opinion. Yes, what she did is so much more impactful. And the dad didn't want to let her write her application essay on that because it wasn't quote unquote academic enough. So you see a common theme, the weight loss example, this example. if your kid looks like a robot, it's just NHS, tennis, the end, then they look like a robot. And they want to meet people, 3D people with quirks and nuances, not robots. That's the key.
And I think that's one of the things, because I remember my daughter would always say this. The colleges are looking for pointy people, meaning they're looking for people who are out in a particular edge, doing something different because they want to round out their classes. And so they're looking for these different types of people. We touched a little bit on sports. How much does sports really matter? I mean, unless your kid's super top notch, like how much does it really matter on the resume and on the money side?
We've had a couple of people over the years who've gotten to go to great schools with scores that were incredibly low, who were amazing athletes. One of them actually got drafted, didn't end up being a starter in the NFL, but played on the practice squad for a year or two for a team. And yeah, they got into the school that they got into out west with a score of 12 points lower on the ACT than kids who got rejected from the same school the same year. So if you are that good, you know, one of the tops in the States, if you're being actively recruited, if you have coaches stored in your cell phone at an early age, then yeah, you can get away with a lower score. But there's one website I want to share here. She has a wealth of information, and she and I see eye to eye on a lot of the sports recruiting stuff. Her name is Lynn O'Shaughnessy, and she has a website called thecollegesolution.com. Great. It's a free email newsletter. She sells a very cheap book, like a workbook that parents can put their numbers into and sort of start to see the financial realities. But she's a pretty down-to-earth, awesome resource. And she has these blog posts, you can look them up for the show notes, about the realities of the sports scholarship and how few people get it. And even if they do, does the swim team, the most recent one she posted not too long ago, does the swim team only have like 8 scholarships at this one school to allocate across all 4 grades? So that's 2 scholarships per grade on average. And there's a dozen plus kids per grade on the team. And are they going to lavish a lot of it on the person that they need to for sure recruit and not so much on the others? So a lot of times the kids will get a scholarship that is sufficient to pay books for sports. Now, there's one caveat. Is it a great way for parents for whom money is no object and they can be a full pay person to be a mediocre athlete who it's their way of getting to go to a school they otherwise would not get into? For sure, if you're willing to pay the full price. Like there's plenty of that goes on, but there's not a lot of full ride type scholarships. She has the stats. I won't try to remember them off the top of my head, but it is teeny tiny as far as the percent of people that pull that off.
And unfortunately, I see posts all the time in some of the financial groups of the amount of money people pay on sports between all the training, the equipment, and then the travel fees and everything else. I'm like, if you just saved all that money, you could pay for college because it's kind of nuts.
3 kids times 12 plus years of travel sports each put into a low-cost index fund easily, no matter what assumptions you put there, are $500,000, if not $1 million, for sure. It's because it's not just the travel fees, it's the hotels, it's the plane, it's the league fees, it's the batting coach, it's the pitching coach. It's enormous, for sure.
And they all tell you, your kid's almost good enough, a little help, and he can get there.
Yeah.
It's a shame how they do that.
But the more important part about sports is not even the money. Of all of our heartbreak stories that we've heard over the years, it's usually someone who overcommits to sports. Because I love sports. I do fantasy football. I watch the NFL. Like I like sports, but you have to know if your kid is the kind of kid who can still get a stellar GPA while doing 30 hours a week of a sport, like between football film plus football practice plus conditioning plus weight room plus this plus that plus scrimmage plus travel to and from the game on Friday plus. And so there are some kids who are so smart that they're super fun to work with, where it's just like, wow, you don't realize what a rare specimen you are. But a lot of kids, they're smart, and the reason they got the bad grade was because this is a line I use all the time with parents. Sometimes they don't like it. Are you a scholar athlete or are you an athlete scholar? Because it gets real gray sometimes. Because some kids truly spend more time on the sport than attending school plus homework combined, depending. You got to make sure that unless you're being recruited, you got to be on the right side of that.
And that you do. I mean, again, a lot of this is understanding the game, understanding your child, having conversations, finding the resources. And now more than ever, all of this is available on the internet. You can Google so many answers, and it's just taking the time to figure it all out. And it's big money. So put a little bit of effort and time into spending that kind of money. Is there anything else you wanted to share on the subject of college admissions and tests and scholarships, but didn't get a chance to?
I think the way to provide the most value to your listeners, well, there's one specific thing I want to mention, and then I can give you some links as well, because further reading, that kind of thing. But a disproportionate share of really awkward, heartbreaking situations that we see, and this is politically incorrect, but it's accurate at many schools, not all schools. Many times, kids are given the message around SAT, ACT by either independent college counselors or officials at their school or the PTSA or just from their friends. They're told, wait till second semester junior year and take the first test of second semester cold, meaning the February ACT and the March SAT. And then once you see what happens, which one you're better at, then you can study for the stronger test. Now, what happens is, and this isn't just me in Atlanta, this is anywhere in America, by the time that the latter test, February ACT, March SAT, comes back, it's basically March 20th-ish. Any tutor who's any good, not just us, there are other good tutors in Atlanta, it's over. Like, you can start doing stuff summer before senior year or senior year maybe. But people book up pretty far. It's like doctor's appointments. People book up really far, really fast. And what if prom conflicts with the May SAT date or AP exams, or you need to take SAT subject tests, or you're out of town at summer camp during the June test date? The single biggest risk that any family can make is listening to anyone who tells you to take the real test cold, which is reckless, terrible advice. And you want to do not a fake test, a real retired test. Always, and I can give you the link, you have to ask whatever organization is in your area, is this a real full-length test written by the SAT or ACT, not you? Not you. Because there's all these combo comparison, let's see which one you're better at in only 40 minutes. You can't do that. There's only one way to find out which test you're better at. Real, full-length, 3-hour test of each on 2 separate days. Anybody who tells you that you can do it in one day, run away screaming, do not hire them, tell friends not to use them, because it's unethical. You either offer real full-length exams or offer nothing at all. That's the only way that anyone should do it. So if you do that, like I mentioned, it's either near the end of sophomore year or the summer before junior year, one of those two, you have so many opportunities. You have 7 to 10 test dates in front of you. There's very few surprises, very few heartbreaking stories, but probably over 50% of all the really awkward conversations I have stem from kids starting too late, taking the test cold, polluting their permanent record, which some places like Georgetown are really weird about making sure you send your whole SAT history. Yeah. And the other thing is, and this happens, I posted on Facebook on our Facebook page a couple months ago, if you take it cold and then go up too much, they can cancel your scores. Because there's that girl in Florida who had her scores canceled for going up 330 points on the SAT, which is the equivalent of 9 points on the test. Maybe she cheated, maybe she didn't. But you don't want to put a real cold score where you have no clue what you're doing, no pacing, no timing into the record books. And then possibly, if you work hard, because we had a girl that happened to this year where this is a common situation. Many schools, if you want to do dual enrollment and take college classes while you're still in high school, those universities or colleges will make you take an ACT. So this girl was really salty because her mom made her take the ACT the morning of homecoming when she wanted to be doing hair appointments in order for her to qualify for dual enrollment the next semester. So she put in just enough effort to get the 21 that is needed to get dual enrollment. And then once it was time, she studied her butt off and she got 11 points higher. She got a 32 and her scores got flagged and she had to go drive and take it at a separate location and take a validation test because no one should ever go up 11 points. And so it was fine. It was fine, but it was stressful for a while. And that's the kind of thing where if you listen to that advice of wait till second semester, it's terrible. And it happens 90% of schools in America. You can't. You got to do them early.
I'm surprised. Yeah, I would think you'd want to do it early so that you had a good idea of where you sat and then you had the time to continue to improve. And have the flexibility to do that. And that also gives you a good idea of where you're going to school, because you can start to rule in and rule out and to wait to the end.
And I get it. Literally, if I were the Secretary of Education in Georgia, my first step would be to double the funding for guidance counselors in all schools, because they have a thankless job. They're underpaid, they're overworked. There's often 500 kids for every one of them. And part of the advice that's often given, like just wait till second semester if you got time, part of it is just a function of they need to focus on the seniors, because they do, because the seniors have their January application deadlines. I think part of it is a function of the insufficient funding of college counseling personnel in high schools. So that's a different issue. The funding question is always hard in schools. But part of that advice, I think, is because they're drowning. They really are. The best thing, if any listeners that you have are officers in the PTSA organizations at their school, make it an annual fundraiser. That's what I've told a lot of PTSAs that I'm friendly with here in town. Make an annual fundraiser where you offer what I just said, last 2 days of sophomore year, do a full SAT one day, full ACT the other, make it like a $10 donation for each of the 2 tests that goes and helps fund the PTSA, because the paper cost is like $2, whatever. And then every kid knows. And then there's less surprises. And then you have better admissions results, higher scores for the schools. Everybody wins. Like that's the kind of thing that's wouldn't take that much to organize. So if there's parents who really want to help their school, that's a great PTSA idea.
And thank you for sharing that. So I'm going to ask you the question. Maybe you've already given us a bunch of them just in the last couple minutes, but based on our conversation, what's one action step people can take this week to move forward on the college decision process?
If you are a parent of a sophomore, then right now is perfect to be figuring out when you're going to take a timed SAT and an ACT, so you can figure that out. If you're a parent of, say, a middle schooler who's about to start high school, making sure that your kid is on the right math track is often the most important thing. Not that other classes are not important, but math is such a foundational element of math classes, plus physics, plus chemistry, plus econ. There's so many classes that are math in disguise that if there's a parent who's a eager middle schooler parent, making sure your kid has an excellent math foundation, because some of the hardest problems we have as tutors are kids whose math foundations are so weak that we have to spend almost all of our time fixing the math problem, and then we have to neglect the other areas of the SAT and ACT.
And math takes a while to learn. So getting that strong foundation up front is very, very important. It comes down to everything else, just like personal finance, right? You've got to plan, take small steps, do it early, and life becomes so much easier at the end.
For sure.
It's time to learn the secrets of life. What's your secret to living an abundant life?
I would say the secret to me living an abundant life is always to be learning. Omnivore of all kinds of different information from blogs and podcasts like yours and other newsletters, just trying to always be learning. It makes life fun. And it's just like people say, it's amazing how you can increase your odds of luck with little preparation. And I think that a lot of the great ideas I get, a lot of the great people I've met have come from being engaged, just being someone who's out there in the community trying to get information and learn and always be a lifelong learner, not someone who stopped on graduation day.
And that's a shame because, to be honest, if you look at the stats of people who stop on graduation day, it's really, really high. And in today's world that is changing so fast and so quickly, if you're not constantly learning and moving forward constantly, you're moving backwards, and that is going to make you unemployable one day. It's going to kind of leave you out of the game. You won't be able to enjoy so much of technology coming forward and everything else. Absolutely. Keep learning.
For sure.
What did you learn later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
Probably personal finance. I naturally had a tendency to hustle, flipping baseball cards and the other stuff I mentioned earlier, lemonade stands, the Gary Vee type stuff. But I guess formal personal finance education. Now, candidly, had I spent time working on that in high school rather than getting a great GPA, I could have jeopardized some scholarships. So I don't have that much regret. But I would tell students, if there's a school down the street from us called Dunwoody High School, it's called the Finance Academy, where they have all kinds of these issues covered. And I tell every kid, yes, take those classes. You'll be better off for it. The most practical thing you'll do in high school. And truthfully, if I won the Mega Millions or something, I couldn't sit on my hands. I get very bored on the beach very quickly. I would totally start a personal finance advocacy group to try and make all schools, all states have a mandatory personal finance requirement for high school graduation. Nothing could make a bigger impact to our country than if there was truly a required, if PE is required, I don't know how personal finance isn't, because that's as important.
It is. It's very important. I think, though, you end up back in the same place where we kind of started this conversation. If the person teaching finance doesn't truly understand finance, then they can't take you to that high level. Just like if you try to go to a big box tutoring house, they don't have the people who have the ability to take you to that level. And at the same point, though, having foundations is just as important. But I think that's the one struggle that always comes up in the conversation. How do you teach personal finance when the person teaching doesn't get it themselves? And that's the bigger problem. I don't know that we have a solution to that.
Yeah.
What's one piece of advice you would give to your younger self?
Probably to have left my job earlier in corporate America. What we did is what I call chicken entrepreneurship. We were being chickens and keep the day job until we no longer could. Our tutoring income was our primary source of income for at least 18 months before we finally pulled the cord. And I'm a person who's Clark Howard cautious by nature financially. And I look back and I wish I weren't good at math, but I am. That 18-month delay compounded over the decades. It's okay. I'll live. But I think many people, if you're hardworking and willing to learn, I encourage entrepreneurship in a lot of my friends, not all of them, but if they ask me about it, if they're entrepreneurial enough to ask me about it and they're curious, they often are better off than they think and they have more talent than they think. We've coached a number of fellow budding entrepreneurs to try and pay it forward. We had some people that helped nudge us in the right direction. And I think that that's a neat community. You and I are both part of some communities on Facebook that do that. And I think that's a great way to give back and also stay fresh.
Absolutely. And I think that's probably another class, and it's coming up more and more in school, is entrepreneurship, in teaching kids how to run businesses, because I think that's another viable skill that people need to have.
Absolutely.
So where can people find you and connect and learn more about your services?
Our company is Edison Prep, Edison like Thomas Edison. EDISONPREP.com is our website. As far as the main resources, if you go to our website, there's the resources page, which has all these categories of info about financial aid for recruited athletes. There's an Ivy League corner. There's a I'm stumped on what to write for my essay corner. There's a lot of different resources on our resources page. Our Facebook page, we post stuff pretty frequently, a couple times a week. Our blog, we only do a couple times a year, and it's often a very data-heavy, data-rich analyses that parents would enjoy. And that's mostly it. The Facebook page and our resources page and the blog are the three main ways that people can get value from us.
Awesome. And I know you have a lot of great information there, and we will make sure to put those links in the show notes. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
I urge you to start having conversations about the cost of college and the expectations of how it's going to be paid for. At $250,000 or more, the party should be a lot nicer than what most kids get in college. Please take the time to run the numbers and make sure you have a good fit for the college that you picked, along with the major. Like Brian said, parents, listen to your kids. They know their dreams and they have some incredible stories. And besides, the college admissions officers can tell when it's you versus them writing those stories. This week's action step: parents of sophomores should have their kids take a time test. For younger kids, make sure they are on the right math track. It really comes down to planning ahead, like in all parts of life. Learn the game, be prepared, and start taking small action steps. If you'd like to connect with Brian, Edison Prep is where you can find him. If you're still listening, you must have liked the episode. So please share it with a few friends, and if you get a chance, leave a review. I'd appreciate that. You can also connect with me on Facebook. There's both a Facebook page and a Facebook group for Richer Soul. What's preventing you from moving forward, and who are you putting on your team to help build the life you deserve? Taking no action creates a far worse outcome in life than trying something and failing. I can help you achieve your goals through coaching and accountability. Just email me, and we can start with a short chat to see if we're a good fit for coaching. For many people, one session allows them a giant leap forward towards their dreams. You can always get me at rocky@richersoul.com. I'd love to hear how you're doing and how the information I've shared has helped. Thanks for listening. Have an abundant week.